Prepare to have your health questions answered here on Safe, Effective Natural Solutions with Dr. Todd Binkley, owner of Binkley Healing Center in downtown Ventura. Now, here's Dr. Todd.
Good afternoon. I am Dr. Todd Binkley, board-certified doctor of non-force chiropractic and practitioner of functional medicine. I identify conditions other doctors miss by doing tests they don't often do. Last week, we talked about osteoporosis. I began the show by answering a question from listener Grace in Ventura, who wanted me to talk about the difference between osteoporosis and osteoarthritis and the best ways to treat those things without becoming dependent on drugs. And I ended up spending the whole show talking about osteoporosis because it's such a large topic. Plus, I was also really excited about, and still am, and will still be giving more information from this spectacular symposium I attended, which held in San Francisco last weekend, the Laboratory Endocrine and Neurotransmitter Symposium. I've taken it for 5 years now. I'll probably continue taking it every year because the speakers they have there are world-renowned speakers, lecturers, professors at universities, authors, just amazing material. So, people often wonder, how do you find the best doctor? Did he go to Harvard? Is he have privileges at the Mayo Clinic? I always tell people the best way to tell if you've got a doctor that's going to give you the best treatment available is ask them what seminars they took last year. We're all doctors are required to maintain our licenses to take continuing education seminars, to maintain our knowledge, to keep abreast of all of the latest research, which is just constantly getting better and better every year, and that's really exciting. So I did promise I would talk about the difference. Grace's question was about the difference between osteoporosis and osteoarthritis. So osteoporosis is a disease of bones, a loss of bone density. We spent the whole last show talking about that. Osteoarthritis is not related to osteoporosis at all, even though they sound similar. Osteoarthritis is a disease of joints, mainly. Osteo means bone, arthro means joint, itis means inflammation. The reason osteo, the root word for bone, is in what is basically a joint condition is because when your joints break down over time from minor injuries and stress, but mostly from neglect. This is the major reason that osteoarthritis occurs anywhere in your body. It can occur from trauma, but most of it, almost everyone gets arthritis as they get older. That's why they call it the disease of aging, is because it does tend to be very common in most people. It is not inevitable. There are lots of people who are in their 80s and 90s and have no significant amounts of osteoarthritis. But more importantly, when you take x-rays on people in their 50s, 60s, 70s, or 80s, no one gets osteoarthritis or any other kind of arthritis uniformly in every joint in their body as they get older. So it is not caused by aging. It is associated with aging, because most people get more of it as they get older, but it's caused by neglect. In other words, there's lots of people who don't get it when they get older, and the difference is mostly stretching the muscles that tend to overload the joint tissue in your body. So the main cause of arthritis, especially in your neck and your back and your low back and your hips and your knees and your ankles and your shoulders, your elbows and your wrists, is lack of maintaining flexibility. Over time, our bodies just get stuck in certain positions. We spend all day long sitting in chairs instead of getting up and moving around. But just getting up and moving around, walking, for example, which is excellent for cardiovascular and mental health, just walking will not do much of anything to maintain flexibility in your joints. It's a little better than sitting in a chair all day, but only a little. What you really need to do to prevent and reverse arthritis is identify the joints that are, well, you can feel pain in your joints, to identify the muscles around those joints that have been tight for years. When people come to me, they're surprised, oh, my hips just started hurting 3 weeks ago. I don't know what happened. Well, did anything happen? No. Did you fall off a ladder? No. Did you have a car accident? No. There's no particular injury. Everything shows up at some point. People are always surprised. Oh, but last week I felt fine. Today I have pain. What happened? Well, your hips, wherever that painful spot is, was an accident waiting to be happen most of the time. If it's an arthritic condition, if it's a degenerative joint condition, you have patterns of tension that build up in your muscles over time, over long periods of time, not weeks, decades. Most of the time when I come in and do a physical exam, when someone comes in and I do a physical exam on someone, it's very easy to tell on palpation, just by pushing on bones and joints and palpating the muscles, feeling for tension in the muscles. It becomes very clear that in certain spots in most people's bodies, especially the base of the neck, the low back, sometimes the middle back, sometimes the upper neck, various parts of the body, it's very clear that tension has been there for 20, 30 years. It takes a long time for joints, certain joints in the spine in particular, to become that tight. And so people go to traditional chiropractors and get an adjustment, and it feels better immediately. And that's great. That's so much better than doing nothing. But some people are frustrated by the fact that when they get a traditional adjustment, or a deep tissue massage, or any kind of forceful treatment. Oh, I have all this tension. Force it out of me, please. And you do that, and you get a hit of endorphins, and, you physically release some of that tension, and it feels amazing. For how long? A day? A couple of days? At most, maybe a week or two if you're really lucky. The problem with forcing all that tension out of your body that you have allowed to accumulate is your body doesn't learn anything from that. If you want to reverse the pattern of tension, that pattern of tension in your muscles that's been built up over time, then you need to do something else. And that is the reason that applying massive force with a really deep tissue, forceful massage, or a standard traditional chiropractic adjustment often doesn't last. Again, these are great things to do. If you're not going to do anything else, please continue getting traditional chiropractic or massage. They're both wonderful things that will prevent you from becoming worse than you would otherwise. But there's something that's even better. And that is to identify the patterns of tension in your muscles. Patterns of tension in your muscles build up over time and persist for years, for decades, from poor posture, from crappy beds, from car seats that push your head forward to prevent whiplash and never allow you to sit up straight, from just sitting in a chair all day, staring at a computer screen and allowing your shoulders to come up around your ears, and just having most people know when they have bad posture, and they just figure there's nothing you can do about it. Well, there is something you can do about bad posture always, and that is to get it assessed and learn how to do some very specific stretches to reverse those patterns of tension that build up in your muscles. So that's the key phrase. I'll say it again. Most people don't know this. Patterns of tension in your muscles build up over years and decades. And you'd think, oh, well, if my muscles are tight, I'd feel that. Sometimes you feel it, but most of the time you don't. You don't feel it until one day the result of that pattern of tension on your joints or the attachment of those muscles suddenly begins to hurt. So you're walking around with a sub-threshold accident waiting to happen for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. Finally, it just goes above that threshold, and now you feel the pain. And you think, oh my God, what just happened? What just happened was the straw that broke the camel's back. Hopefully, there were no camels involved and your back's not broken. But it's a very confusing thing if you don't have an understanding of it, but I'm very happy to explain it to you if you come into my office. It's very common, patterns of tension build up in your muscles all the time, and they can be identified. So here's the thing that I get all the time. Someone comes into me, I have this horrible pain in my neck or my shoulder or my knee or plantar fasciitis or sciatica. I have something in my joints, in my musculoskeletal system, and it just started last week. Nothing happened. I didn't have an accident. I didn't fall. Nothing happened. And I do my physical exam, and it's very clear immediately that there has been a pattern of tension in the hip rotators, for example. The hip rotators are muscles in the upper glute area that attach from your pelvic bone near the base of your spine in the middle out to the side of your hip bone, the bone that you can feel, the easiest bone to feel on your hip. There are several muscles that cross your hip joint from the front, from the back. Most of them are in the back or in sort of in the middle, in between. And these hip rotators constantly get tight when you sit a lot. Raise your hand if you spend a lot of time sitting in front of a computer, sitting in a car, sitting at home, reading, watching TV, whatever. We all do it. And, it's fine, but you need to do something to offset the effects of that by identifying these places where tension has built up over time, and you don't feel it. You don't feel that tension until it's been there for a long time, until it finally so badly irritates those places where the tendons and those muscles attach to bone, or where, because of the compression on the joint tissue gets so bad, then boom, you suddenly feel a horrible pain, even though maybe all you did was bend over to pick up something off the floor. In fact, a herniated disc in the low back is one of the most common joints that becomes arthritic and an accident waiting to happen by something as simple as bending over to pick up something off of the floor. Most people over 40 have some significant patterns of tension built up that are causing breakdown in the joint tissue, making it very easy to tear, basically making it an accident waiting to happen. So that's why these things seem to occur suddenly, but with osteoarthritis, with any kind of musculoskeletal injury, unless you had an obvious trauma, you fell off of a roof or a ladder, or you had a really bad car accident, or you slipped and fell, obviously trauma can cause these conditions. But most of the time, even when you have a trauma, when you have a slip and fall, when you have a car accident, when you have a fall of any kind, what's the part that ends up getting injured? It's the part that's been an accident waiting to happen. It's the weakest link. No one gets osteoarthritis, the most common arthritis of aging, uniformly in every joint in their body as they get older. When you shoot x-rays on people, I've seen thousands of them, no one has arthritis uniformly in every joint in their body. They only have it in some joints. Well, which ones? The ones that aren't moving. The ones that haven't been flexible for years because the muscles around those joints have become short and tight. And you'd think if muscles around the joints at the base of your neck or at the base of your low back or anywhere in your body have become short and tight, you'd think you'd feel that immediately. You don't. There's no flashing light. You don't notice really anything at all. The one thing you can notice is loss of flexibility. So people do notice as they get older that they can't turn their head when they're backing their car out as far as they used to be able to, or it's difficult to bend over and touch your toes. They notice lack of range of motion, but they still think they feel fine. I'm just getting a little bit older. Getting a little bit older does not necessarily have to involve losing range of motion in your joints. So if you get a good head-to-toe examination of all the muscles in your body that impact all those joints, you'll often find that there are simple ways you can reduce that tension, restore flexibility, restore normal tension in those muscles, take the pressure off of those joints. The arthritis is caused, the meniscus in your knee wears out because your quadriceps are constantly overloading, compressing that cushion between the upper and lower bones, between your thigh and your lower leg, and oftentimes, as often, because hip rotators in your thigh are constantly twisting your leg just a little bit so that every time you take a step, your knee tissue, your knee joint, instead of just bending forward and back like a hinge, which is all it wants to do, it's being forced to twist a little bit because your hip rotators are short, pulling your knee towards the outside, trying to turn your foot out. If you're a ballerina or a soccer player, you use these muscles all the time. If you're someone who doesn't do either of those things, you probably never use your hip rotators very much. And interestingly, dancers, ballerinas in particular, overuse the external hip rotators and never the opposite ones. And they often end up with knee injuries as well from the same problem. So the only way to know if that's you is to get a proper examination and identify the patterns of tension in your muscles. And these are things that most doctors never check. So if you find them, there are always ways to implement a stretching program, sometimes requiring a helper, sometimes requiring me to do some work with you on the table to remove that tension. And oftentimes I invite someone to bring in a helper to show you how you can do some of these very specific stretches at home that will go gradually, if you do them consistently, reduce and reverse that tension, restore normal length. You're physically making these muscles longer. That's what relieves the pressure on the joints. I'm Dr. Todd Binkley. You're listening to Safe, Effective, Natural Solutions to Almost Any Health Problem. Today we're talking about osteoarthritis, and the most important thing is to reduce the tension on the joints that causes the damage in the first place. But there are nutrients that you can take to help your body heal arthritis as well. Among the most common ones that people hear about are things like glucosamine sulfate, MSM, chondroitin sulfate. These are precursor nutrients for building new joint tissue, and they wouldn't be around if they didn't work for anyone. They work for a lot of people, but usually only for maybe 3 or 4 months, and then they kind of taper off in their effects. I find that the most important thing for nutrient-wise is to give your body other nutrients that help build joint tissue, which are actually joint tissue from other animals in form that are difficult to describe, but they're made by companies like Doctors Research and Standard Process. And most importantly, systemic enzymes. So the main thing that needs to happen to heal and repair joint tissue, similar to osteoporosis, is you need to break down the old joint tissue before you replace it with new tissue. And our body makes proteolytic enzymes. Proteolytic just means breaking down protein. Our body makes enzymes that break down old proteins so that they can be effectively replaced with new proteins, with new tissue made from protein. But the production of those enzymes decays over time, usually starting in your 30s, which is why arthritis often begins in your 40s, even when you don't know about it. If you look at hundreds and hundreds of x-rays, you first see when you study radiology, you can often tell how old someone is by the amount of arthritis they have starting to form in the joints, especially in their spine. So the nutrients that I've found to be most effective over time to help reverse arthritis and act as a indirect anti-inflammatory, which even relieves the pain because it's reducing the inflammation in the joints, are systemic enzymes, things like Serrapeptase and Nattokinase. So systemic enzymes are enzymes that your body can use to break down fibrin, which is the main protein of scar tissue, over time. So nattokinase, for example, was famously identified decades ago in Japan in a food called natto, which is a fermented soy product, which is very uncommon to be eaten in the West because it has the consistency and odor of nasal mucus. It's really disgusting, but Japanese families start their children on it early as a porridge and they get used to it and it doesn't bother them. I have a cousin that lives in LA who has a Japanese wife, and so I tasted it once and it wasn't quite as bad as I expected it to be, but I'm definitely not gonna. I've never eaten it since. It's pretty gross. It's stringy, and anyway, not very many people, unless you're Japanese and have gotten used to it, are going to eat the fermented soy product called Natto. But the great thing about Natto is there is an enzyme in it, so named Nattokinase, which has robust research. It is one of the main reasons that the Japanese have much lower rates of cardiovascular disease, and they live so long, so well, because they consume this in their diets. It's only one of the reasons, but it's an important one. So Nattokinase breaks down fibrin. That is the scar tissue protein that forms arthritis in your joints. And so when you consume nattokinase, it helps break down that fibrin. Similar, and also famously, nattokinase also helps break down fibrin and hardening fibrin, forming, creating scars in your blood vessels. So actually, nattokinase is more famous for its effects on blood vessels than on joints, but it works on both. There's another very important natural enzyme, which is even more powerful for joints, called serrapeptase. Serrapeptase is an enzyme made by silkworms. So it's not inexpensive. It can be a little pricey because it's literally the enzyme that a silkworm makes to digest its way out of a silk cocoon. Silk is the strongest natural fiber in nature. If you shoot a fiber of silk with a bullet, it will deflect. If you shoot any other natural fiber, the bullet will tear right through it. If you shoot a strand of silk, it will deflect. It's really, really strong silk. If you've ever tried to tear a necktie that's made out of silk, then you can get an impression of how strong silk is. So how does a squishy little worm get out of this cage of silk, the strongest natural fiber? Well, it makes this enzyme called serrapeptase. So that's why it's a little pricey to get this product, because it's literally extracted from the intestines of silkworms. But it's a natural product, and it's totally safe because it has, there's no side effects. And the only interactions that you have to be concerned about, any doctor has to be concerned about, is these drugs will make blood thinners work better. They will never thin your blood unless it's too thick. But if you're on warfarin, a very common blood thinner, which is also in rat poison, Coumadin, I don't want to scare people too much who are on warfarin, but sometimes people need it. My own mother had been taking it for a long time. I finally got her switched to a better blood thinner called Eliquis after she had deep vein thrombosis, but that's a whole other story. It is important to know that you shouldn't take nattokinase or serrapeptase if you're on warfarin, unless you have a very progressive physician who will measure your INR, your international normalized ratio, your prothrombin time. There's ways they always measure. When you're on warfarin, they always measure your blood thinning activity, and you actually can take these enzymes even when you're taking that blood thinner, but only if you measure it and adjust the dose accordingly. So it is contraindicated to take these things if you're on a blood thinner. But if you're not on a blood thinner, then anyone can take nattokinase and serrapeptase, and they are the most effective things I've ever found for reversing osteoarthritis as a supplement, in addition to, of course, doing stretching. I'm Dr. Todd Binkley. I've helped thousands of people reverse the effects of both osteoarthritis and osteoporosis by identifying these patterns of tension in the muscles and giving you some specific stretches and a few things that we need to do on the table. Most of these conditions are caused by stress, identifiable nutrient deficiencies, lack of exercise, and general neglect. So if you want to be truly healthy, you have to take responsibility for your own health, but you don't have to do it alone. I would be honored to have the opportunity to help you do these things, to identify the things that you need to do to make your body work better the way it is designed to do. Remember, the condition of your body is far more important than any disease you've ever been diagnosed with. And I'm taking the time and the cost of this program to teach you how you can improve your health. Do something this week to be a little bit healthier than you were yesterday or last week. Go for a walk, Take a Tai Chi class, a stretching class, go for a swim if you have access to a pool, and send me your questions. I'd love to be able to help you with anything you're struggling with. I look forward to the privilege of speaking with you again right here next Friday at 4 p.m. Have a blessed weekend.
You've been listening to Safe, Effective Natural Solutions with Dr. Todd Binkley. If you have a health question you want discussed on the show, email your health questions to Dr. Binkley at binkleyhealingcenter.com. Take advantage of this opportunity to ask questions for yourself and for your loved ones, because our health matters. Join him next Friday at 4 p.m. for Safe, Effective Natural Solutions, right here on 98.3 The Word, KDAR.